We have been in this series called The Power to Change. We're into week 5 now, and we've been just going through about how we can change. It's at the beginning of the year. Often people have New Year's resolutions, and it kind of ties into that. We talked about how the first week, how most New Year's resolutions fail within the first couple weeks, and we are wanting to give you some tools, but even higher than that, we want to give you some purpose for change and why you would want to change. This week, we're going to talk about how you don't win by trying. Has anybody ever had a coach, like a hockey coach or a volleyball coach? Anybody that has ever used this line? you don't win by trying. You win by doing, right? And so we want to look at that this morning, the difference really between trying and training. Okay, and I'm almost giddy this morning because there's going to be an interview at the end of this that I'm really excited about it. I'll talk to you a little bit more of that as we go. In first week, we talked about how you do what you do because of what you think of you. And how so much of our failure when it comes to trying to change is because we are convinced that we're going to fail a lot of the time. And we have wanted to express to you that it really doesn't matter what you think of you in terms of whether you can be successful. It's what God thinks of you that you want to be focused on. Who does God see you to be? And allowing yourself to see yourself through God's eyes. What God designed you to be. What God has equipped you to be. Sometimes we get bogged down with our own perceptions of ourselves, our own failures, our own history. So the series so far has gone like this. Power to Change started with week 1, and it was talking about the spiritual who. The spiritual who. We talked about how change doesn't come by behavior modification. Behavior or change comes when we invest in spiritual transformation. You remember that? Is anybody here that week? The next week, I was talking about the spiritual why. What is it that drives you to change? What are you on this earth to do? Is it just to look good on the beach? Or is it to actually serve with the gifts that you've been given? Why are you here? Why would you want to change? Do you have a big enough why? Do you have a spiritual enough why? The last 2 weeks, Steve talked about the spiritual what. And we talked about how there are some habits that you should be adding to your life. And then he talked about the spiritual what not. And these are the things that you should be detracting from your life. These habits that you need to remove from your life in order to grow into who you were designed to be. This week, we are going to talk about the spiritual how. And you know what's interesting on this front, and even at the end of last year, as Steve and I had gotten together and this spiritual care team, as we've talked, there's something that we've talked a little bit about, Steve and I, a little more than just within the spiritual care team, but the idea of what is essential to faith. Steve and I both have friends and family who have, in some way, walked away from faith. And is it really faith that they're walking away from, or is it religious systems that they're walking away from? And so as we talk about this, the spiritual how, I don't know if you've noticed this about the bridge, but there are things that we tend to try and steer away from. And we are not perfect in this, but believe me. But you will not get us saying that you should be reading or studying from a specific translation of the Bible. I like to use the New International Version. This week I'm using the New Living Translation. It doesn't matter what translation. We're not going to be identified by the translation of the Bible. We don't really want to be identified by the type of music we do, even though that kind of tends to happen. Our goal in many ways is that if you end up with some reason why you feel you need to leave the bridge, that you can do that without leaving your faith. Our goal here is to get you tapped into your relationship with God. That you would grow and be able to grow on your own in your faith apart from us. We've been successful, we think, if you are actually reading your Bible and growing in your prayer life. And if you are actually growing in your faith, which is those central things, and that it's not tied specifically to a religious organization, religious system, how you do church, then we're being successful. And so when we get into this spiritual how, I've been looking at this and thinking, okay, I don't want to introduce a new system because systems have their limitations. And God created you in a specific way, which is pretty specifically not the way he created me. And you are happy about that. And so as we move into this spiritual how, I want to give you some latitude as to how this does, but I also want to give you encouragement to not sit and be lazy about your own training simply because, you don't feel right about a certain system. So, as we talk about it this week, the emphasis is to stop trying and start training. So, have you ever... So, I asked Steve, I was talking to him earlier whether I should use this example, and he didn't say no, but he didn't say yes. Okay. So, when I think about trying, I can picture some guy sitting at the lake watching somebody go barefoot or something pretty challenging, and he goes, I'll give that a try. Here, hold my beer. Right? And it never goes well. Right? There is this whole trying of, that looks cool, I think I'll try that. But there's been zero effort put into it. Maybe, trying without preparation often just means you're going to fail. And there's a big difference between trying to do something and training to do something. And the Bible talks about this. Paul talks about this specifically, and it shows up in the passages that we already heard. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, it says, don't you realize that in a race, everyone runs, but only one person gets the prize? So run to win. All athletes are disciplined in their training. It doesn't say they're disciplined in their competing. It doesn't say they're disciplined in their trying. It says they're disciplined in their training. They do it to win a prize that will fade away. But we do it for an eternal prize. Now, let me give you a little background to who Paul is writing to here. He's writing to the church in Corinth, which is in Greece, which is about an hour's drive from Athens. And does anybody know of some historic games that have gone on in Athens for many years? Called the Olympics. I mean, it's gone around the world, but it started in the Olympics. Boy, you guys are really engaged. So the Olympics, every 4 years, was like an hour and a half drive from the people that Paul is writing to. He understood competition. And in Corinth, where Paul is writing this, they had games. I had to pull this up again. It's called the Isthmian Games. And the Isthmian Games happened in Corinth. They happened every 2 years, and they competed in wrestling, in boxing, in chariot races, and poetry. And these were the games that were going on in Corinth. So as Paul is writing to these people, they understand what it is to compete at this highest level. And as he is talking to them, he's going like, nobody who is sober decides to join the Olympics from the stands. It's not like, I'm going to get in there, see that big guy? I can take him. Let's go wrestling, right? People that are competing in these games made a decision to compete long before the games started. And in that period of time, they tried? No, they trained. This passage goes on. So Paul says, so I run with purpose in every step. I am not just shadow boxing. I discipline my body like an athlete, training it to do what it should. Otherwise, I fear that after preaching to others, I myself might be disqualified. And Paul takes this whole imagery of training and he says, you know the way that those athletes are training or those poets are preparing for these competitions? That's how I treat my life. Because I have a plan for my life, and I am living my life where every step I take has purpose in getting me to that point. I train, I treat my body, everything I do is focused on a goal. And then I love what he says to Timothy. As Timothy is preparing the church, and Paul is writing to him instructions about how to create some structure for the church to function in. He says to Timothy, he says, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales. And wherever you are, I'm sure that you have opposing views to Christianity that are infiltrating your life. I mean, just turn on the TV, turn on news, whatever. And Paul says, don't fall for that, and I'm going to tell you how you can avoid falling for those. And he says, rather train yourself to be godly. He doesn't say just be godly, just try to be godly. He says, actually, train yourself to be godly. For physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. So when we look at the difference between trying and training, trying is an attempt to change with minimal commitment. It's this person that just shows up and says, that looks cool, I'll try it. But training is wholehearted commitment to achieve a specific result. And we aren't called to try to be godly. We are called to train to be godly. So, when we train, who here has ever trained for something? Trained for a marathon, or trained to be a nurse, or trained. As I go on this list, everybody should have their hand up in the air at some point, right? You have trained to do something. You didn't just go into whatever your career is without some sort of training. If Carl had never gotten any training on how to do a roof, there would be an awful lot of leaking roofs around here. Right? You don't just try, you train. And when you train, one thing you do is you get the gear. Right? So, what's important if you're going to run a marathon? Shoes, right? And you got to get like the right hat. You got to make sure you have the right clothes. So, there was a time when I thought I could play this. And I remember just getting the gear actually isn't enough. You know, I could look like a marathoner from a distance, but that doesn't make me a marathoner. I could have all the kit. And I remember I picked up this. This is, it's a Squier Strat. Now, if you know anything about guitars, you will know that a Squier Strat is the cheapest Strat that you can possibly get. And so I remember we were the bridge. We were doing some music at the bridge, or I think we were at the band shell, and there was a song that needed an electric guitar part. And I remember thinking, well, nobody else plays electric guitar. I should grab a guitar, and I should play that part. Like, how hard could it be, right? And so I went and got this, and I got an amp, and I practiced for at least half an hour. And I took this and I tried to do that part for the song that I thought we needed the electric guitar part for. And how do you think it went? Not good, right? Now, the best thing is that I play with some really competent people, and they just covered up for me. But I did not train to play the electric guitar. Now, I could play the part from Smoke on the Water, you know that electric part? Dun, 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 dun. And I could do that really well. But that wasn't the part we needed. And so that's kind of how trying goes. So just getting the gear doesn't mean that you are training. Now, over COVID, I had some time, and I really love kind of blues guitar. And so my goal was actually to be able to play the electric guitar with a band and be able to contribute to what we were doing as a band. It's not like a lofty goal. It's just not to actually have the guitar add to the song that we were doing. And so what I did was I had my guitar. My amp was kind of messy, so Jen got me a new guitar amp, and I got myself a place, because it's not like awesome if you pull out your electric guitar and play while everybody's watching TV in the TV room. So I had to get a place where I was going to work on my guitar, and I got Ultimate Guitar Tabs has a whole bunch of tutorials on how to play guitar. And so I actually spent hours training to know how to play this guitar and to do some blues licks and stuff. And I got to the point where, you know, a year or two ago, I could actually take the guitar and I could play it with a band, and it's not out of place, and I know the chords to play, and I can add and I can do what I needed to do. But it was completely different than my first attempt at doing it, because I switched from just simply got the parts, got the gear, let's go try this, to the thing I had to add was a game plan. And when you train, you have to have a plan. Having the gear isn't enough. Being ambitious to try something isn't enough. You actually have to have a plan. And when Paul talks about training, it's implying that you have a plan to move forward in that. So when I'm trying, I hope to become something that I'm not. When I'm trying. When I say, I'm going to try and be a better person at work today without actually putting any training into that, what are the odds that I'm going to be a better person at work? Pretty unlikely. But if I am training myself to be a better person at work, then when I show up and it's one of those days, then I have prepared myself. I've done what I need to do. I have a plan. What is the plan? When I am trying, I hope to become something I am not. When I am training, I am getting better at what I already am. Just let that sink in for a minute. When I am trying, I hope to become something I am not. When I am training, I am getting better at what I already am. So when we switch back to this verse here, it says, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales, rather train yourself to be godly. I love how when Paul is writing this, he puts the entire responsibility on you and on me. It takes away the excuse of, it's the people around me that are keeping me from being godly. It's the people, it's Steve. He just doesn't teach on the right things. Right? It's the band. I just can't worship. And when Paul addresses you about godliness, he doesn't give you permission to blame it on anyone else or the circumstances around you. He puts the entire responsibility on you. Train yourself to be godly. For physical training has some value, but godliness has a value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. So here's the thing about me training myself guitar, is that I haven't really played that guitar now in several months, right? I trained for a while. I still have the skills. It would take a while to get them back, but they're still there. But it doesn't have a whole lot of purpose right now, right? Like I know, and Steve and I have talked about this. Steve trained hard to run a marathon, and then he ran the marathon and hasn't run one since. But running one is way better than anything I've ever done. But it has a purpose and it has an end game. It can be that trophy on the wall. But when we're talking about training for godliness, it always has a purpose. It has a purpose in every one of your interactions. It has a purpose in how you address your anxiety. It has a purpose in how you treat people around you. It has a purpose in how you work in your marriage. It has a purpose in how you raise your kids. It has a purpose in everything around you. And that's what Paul says. Is that physical training or the things of the physical, they hold some value, but godliness has a value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. So, what does training look like? So it's interesting. So we've really tapped into the Bible recap. And I've found I've been doing it for 3 years. I'd encourage you to do it, but let's be honest, it might not work for you. And in fact, maybe you have figured out a way to get into God's Word and to be reading the Bible, and it's working for you, don't stop that. Don't switch over to the Bible recap if you have something that is working for you. And we've introduced the Bible recap because it's worked for a lot of us, but let's be honest, it might not work for you. So what does training look like? And this is where I think we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble when we say, this is the way that you become godly. Getting up early, reading the Bible, spending half an hour in prayer or whatever that is, putting time limits, and projecting on other people the things that have worked for us. So, what I am really excited about is that there are two people here who are leaders here at the Bridge. They are very influential in the people around them. I know them personally to be very godly people, and I know it in their private lives because one is my wife, Jen, and the other one is my boss here at the Bridge, Steve, my co-pastor, and we spend a lot of time. I know both of these people extremely well. I know the character of these people, and they couldn't be more opposite. All right? And so I'm inviting them to come up, and we're going to talk a bit about this training, but we're going to lead off with it a little bit about kind of who they are in their personalities, okay? And this is going to be fun. So obviously you guys have no awkwardness being up here. You're up here all the time. Jen said when I mentioned that I wanted to do this, she said, you should get other people up there. And I'm like, no. Like, people know you, and you have a mutual respect for each other. And yet, like, they couldn't approach life more differently, right? So I'm gonna put this first question up here. What do you feel when you hear the word structure? Steve, you want to go first?
Freedom.
Freedom. Jen?
I feel suffocated and I feel limited.
Yeah.
Truly.
So and I need to throw out just a bit of clarity here, is that and I struggle with whether structure is the right word, whether it's systems, kind of went back and forth, but when we talk about structure, there are certain structures required to function. When we talk about how we make decisions here at the Bridge, there is a structure, where we meet, what time we meet, all of those things, how we make decisions, you require a structure. And if you don't think that's biblical, then you got to look at all the writings that Paul did to Timothy and Titus and Ephesians and Corinthians. A significant part of that is about how to structure a gathering of Christians. But even in that, there is a ton of freedom. So, I'm not talking about no structure, but either structuring everything or structuring next to nothing, right? And so we're going to use the word structure. Hopefully that doesn't inhibit our conversation, right? So freedom. Why freedom?
Because I can't function without structure. I can't. If things for me are very linear, and so to know that I do this, then this, then this, then this, brings freedom to me. It allows me. That's, if that makes sense, right? Like if you just gave, I don't function without boundaries well.
Yeah. And Jen, why is it suffocating?
Because I actually see life in a more fluid way. And I feel like if I am locked into a structure, it might be FOMO, maybe fear of missing out on what could maybe be there that I might miss out if I'm so locked into this having to happen now and this having to happen next, and that, but maybe there's something different for my day that God has, and maybe I might miss it if I'm so locked into a plan.
There you go. So and this this next question, and so we've kind of answered that, but when I talked to you guys about this question, it was a bit bigger than that. So why do you think you are that way? Jen, you want to go first on this
No,
one?
I want Steve to go.
Okay.
I want a structure here, man.
Is this the story?
Yeah.
Yeah. You see, it's interesting, and Kevin drew this out of me. Something I had thought about, but really never connected the dots on. How did I become? Because I am very disciplined. I've run 3 marathons, by the way.
Oh, sorry,
not
3.
just one.
Yeah.
Never again. This body's not built for that.
What have you done for me lately?
Yeah. But I am very highly disciplined, highly structured. And I'm like, Kevin said, when did it happen? And I'm like, well, in high school, right? Because if you knew my family growing up, I was disciplined a lot, but we weren't, like, I didn't learn discipline from my family. It all started in high school in volleyball when Ron Foster said, "I see you." And that was in grade 9. And I remember, and I, out of that, I'm like, so what do I have to do to get better, right? Weights? Okay, I'll do weights. I'm short, I got to jump higher. How do I do that? This specific training? Okay, I'll do that. Whatever it takes, right?
Yeah.
The biggest switch came, we had this opportunity. So one of the national coaches for the Olympic team, coaches used to coach at Crestwood. He did a clinic. There was him. He did a clinic for all the hitters, and then he brought the setters coach for the national team to Peterborough. And so every team in the area sent their best hitter and their best setter to this clinic. And so I had the setter. To not drag this story out too long, but this Olympic coach he took us through this thing, and he said, that no setter would ever set for me if he ever bumps a ball. Like, do you know what I mean by? Okay. Like, and he taught us how to dive and set a ball from our back, so that you could, anywhere on the court, if the ball was too low, you just dove, and he taught us that. That was on a Saturday. We had practices every night from 3 to 5. And from 5 to 6:30, I stayed. And Ron Foster, our coach, and this every night would throw, anywhere on the court, he would throw a ball, and it was allowed to bounce once. And I had to run, dive, and set one of the antennas.
Yeah.
And I'm like some people would look at that and say, you're absolutely nuts, and I'm like, I got to be quite good. Like, I was ranked in the top 4 setters in Ontario at one time. And it was that discipline. And I went, oh man, all this hard work, being disciplined, training, there's the reward.
Yeah.
And that was the connection for and then since then, my life has been marked by discipline.
Yeah. And Jen?
I was not the best setter in Canada.
Ontario.
Oh, Ontario was not the best setter. But I had a good time playing volleyball.
And I probably wouldn't like playing with you.
So I would say I came from my general background, a culture that was very structured and cookie cutter, and that always bothered me as a kid. I remember my mom saying, because we also brought a lot of different people into my home, and I remember my mom saying, you can't have a new pair of pants because the other two that are your age, because we had lots of kids in the home, aren't getting any. So you can't either. And I remember thinking, oh no, I didn't think it. I said it, and she was very sensitive, so it wasn't probably nice of me. But I said, you treat us like a herd of cattle. Like, I want to be different, and I have a need that's not getting met because everybody else can't have one, so you can't have one either. And so I always resisted the cookie cutter, everybody's the same thing. And the culture that she came from was just very predictable and very cookie cutter, and everybody dressed the same and looked the same. And that always bothered me because I just always fought for identity, and I love learning from different, and I have lots of different friends, and I love different cultures. I just love different. And so for me, just kind of being maybe encouraged to just be normal probably pushed me into, like, I don't want to be a cookie cutter. Like, I am different than the next person, and I value the person beside me that's different, but I don't expect me to be like everybody else. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, and I remember you talking about the holy huddle.
The holy huddle. I hated the holy huddle because I just felt like at school, like at high school, and I loved my youth group and was very involved in my youth group, but everybody would just cling to each other, and that always bothered me. Like, I felt in high school even, I just can't hang with the holy huddle all the time. Like, I don't feel like I'm on earth to be just always with the same people. I don't like that.
Yeah. We're going to have to keep moving. How does the way you are affect your training?
So the way I am when it comes to training, specifically what you've been speaking on, my day is very structured. And it's you do this, you do this, you do this, and repeat. So that how I train and everything affects that.
Right.
And it's, and it's not, yeah.
And so just training to be godly. How's that look for you, Jen?
I still do certain things most days, but if I miss, I don't get stressed out about it at all because I figure maybe there was something different. But I would say, how does it, like, I mean, I have my quiet time and whatever, but there are days that I don't, and that doesn't bother me. It's just like, maybe my quiet time is my ride home from work then. I don't know. It's different today.
Yeah, so like for me, it's starts anytime from 4 to 4:30, and then it's, it's silence.
He's
it's
talking
solitude.
AM, by the way.
It is reading, journaling, praying, and just listening for God's voice. Then that's, and then I exercise, and then start my day.
Yeah.
So I would exercise too, but it might be a walk with a friend in the afternoon. I do usually have my my stretching quiet time in the morning, but there are days obviously that doesn't happen, but most days it does. But then I would say that part of my exercise regime would be going for a walk with a friend, and I'm just like, woohoo, I got out and saw the sunset with Val yesterday. It was great.
Yeah. So
that was my exercise.
Here is a really good explanation or an example of this. So you're both doing the Bible recap. And so what day are you on, Steve?
On track.
On track this morning, already read. And where
already done, yeah. Read, comments, posted, yeah.
Yep. And where are you, Jen?
So I'm in the New Testament because I haven't started the Old Testament, but I'm behind, and it doesn't bother me one bit.
Yeah.
Because I am still doing the Bible recap.
Okay. I got so many great questions in so little time. So what are the pitfalls to the way you are? Jen, you go first this time.
Well, I don't always think that it's great to be the way I am, because I probably, I don't know, I got a bit of a helter-skelter life sometimes. And sometimes it would affect the people around me as
Right,
well.
yeah. You could say that. Yeah. Have you ever been late for anything?
I'm better than I used to be.
Yeah.
I'm training.
You're training, yeah.
Yes.
Steve.
For me, a big pitfall is things cannot go well if I don't check the box, right? Like if I miss a day, I'm unsettled. If if the routine is broken, I feel like a piece of me is not gonna, like, it's just the day doesn't work right.
Yeah.
And that I've gotten better in that. Like I can actually move things on my calendar now during the day and still breathe.
Yeah.
I can add something to my calendar in the day and still breathe.
Yeah.
So, but that is the pitfall, is that it all becomes about the routine and checking the boxes.
Yeah.
I did ask him to move his seating plan this morning, and it did stress him out.
Yeah.
I asked him to
Yeah.
move over if
Yeah.
he could.
But-
It stressed him
Well,
out.
I moved over, and then you said again.
He's the guy that knows where the cameras are. What happens when you try to operate opposite to who you are? Yeah.
I die. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, Kevin, is a very specific question, because there was a time not too long ago, like I'm not going to belabor this, but part of me hitting the wall and collapsing in 21 was because my routines had been compromised for a long, long time. And I'm not blaming Kevin for this, but I remember Kevin, in one of our conversations one time, he just like, he didn't say this, but what I heard was, I'm too legalistic. The routine, I need to have freedom. I need to just chill, and whatever happens, happens. And I did, and it killed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I can do it for like a little short time, and then it just cramps my style.
It makes you angry.
It makes me angry, apparently.
Yeah. 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 So
I'm
mean,
really glad Ange isn't out here.
Yeah. I mean, you gotta be you in this, right? That's what we're saying. So, what do you practice to accommodate the people in your life who are opposite to you?
Lobo, I'm going first?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, ideally, I would like to practice grace, but I don't know that I do all the time.
Yeah, that was the first thing that came.
Yes.
Huge. I really had to, because for a long time, I was convinced that my way was right, and everybody had to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, because even Jesus got up early in the morning, right? Like,
Jesus also went for a walk with his friends in the afternoon.
and
on the water.
And so yeah, it's grace. Like I had to come to this place where you have to find your pathway to God. You have to find what works for you in training you to become godly, as Paul instructs. My way is a way, not the way, and you need to find your way.
Yeah.
But you need to find it.
Right. Yeah. So you accommodate with grace. So here's another kind of telling thing. How many scheduled meetings do you have in a week? Steve showed me his calendar.
Yeah, Kevin said when we met on Friday, and he, I mean, if you saw him, like, you won't see this, but yeah, it is. Right, like, so it's not all filled in yet, but like that's my week so far. Like, there's stuff every day and certain times, and
I don't even know where my phone is.
So how many scheduled meetings do you have?
So I don't schedule meetings.
Exactly. Okay, so then how many unscheduled meetings do you have in a week?
I have lots.
Yeah.
In fact, I had one this week. it wasn't really like a meeting. I wouldn't call it a meeting because I don't like the word, but it was like a get together where I actually laid on my back and had my feet up because my back was sore. And we had a great chat, didn't we, Juanita?
Yeah.
Did you
Yeah.
ever have that?
Yeah.
No.
No. and unscheduled meetings, Steve. How I know in the past that was impossible for you. Like
Yeah.
yeah, if I ended up getting off early on a Friday, it was completely useless calling Steve.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't on the schedule.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's changed. Like, so highly scheduled, right? Like my calendar's almost full for this coming week. But one thing I've trained myself in this is to keep margin. So there are days where I'm like, if I need to meet with somebody that I haven't planned or they haven't reached out, if I haven't reached them or they haven't reached me, like I intentionally leave margin now so that I can move things.
Yeah.
Took a lot to get there.
Yeah. So what do you value in the people who are opposite to you? And maybe you kind of already covered this in Pitfalls, but you know, when you look at the other person, what do you see in their life that you wish you had?
So I admire Jen deeply. Huge respect for her. And so for people like Jen, people who are more like opposite to me or even moving that way, I appreciate their openness, and I've come to, what's the word you're looking at? What do I value? I value the fact that I see God using them and still working in a structure that would kill me.
Yeah.
They're actually flourishing. And I look and go, what do I need to learn from that for me? But know that it's not me.
Right.
Like, I value your leadership skills and just your ability to do what you do in a week. And I just value different, I guess. So I just think God didn't make all daisies. He made a lot of different kinds of flowers. And I just value different. I just think it's a really good thing. The world's not all like me.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing they're not all like me.
Yeah. Yeah. So which one of you is right?
We both are.
Yeah. Exactly. Right? And you are right in the way that you are. And yeah, I hope this kind of leads to a broader conversation, because there aren't just two types of people either. Right? And you know, as I wrap this up, you guys may as well stay here. You can do whatever you want. The question is kind of how are you training? Because the excuses are gone, right? How are you investing in your relationship with God? Now, I'm not a great reader, but I know that the Word of God is powerful for me in my training to become godly. So, how are you getting into the Word of God? And there really is no excuse. You can say you're a horrible reader. Well, boy, oh boy, there's some useful Audible Bibles out there. And the question is, how are you growing in your conversation with God? And you can say, well, prayer doesn't come naturally to me. Well, prayer doesn't really come naturally to me either. And that is zero excuse. Are you training to pray? Now, for some people, that could be a journal, right? Maybe you are somebody that writes things down. That's been life-changing for people in their relationship with God. That's not me, and that's okay. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's sitting alone. Maybe it's having a cup of coffee. Maybe whatever it is, there are no excuses. Just because you can't do it like Jen does it, or you can't do it like Steve does it, You're not responsible to train like Steve or Jen. You are responsible to train yourself to become godly. And there's a piece of this that if you were going to run a marathon and your leg was broken, what would be the first step in your journey towards training to run a marathon? Healing. And for many of us, our limitations are that we actually need deliverance in our lives. We need to heal our hearts. And maybe that is the first step in your training toward godliness. Are there things that come up in your life that block you from reading? Are there things that come up in your life that block you from praying? Are there things that come up in your life that block you from having relationships with other Christ followers so you can converse about what God is doing in you? Then your training starts with dealing with those blocks. And then you move into godliness. So this week, no excuses. Start training. Father, I just pray for us as a group that we would become closer to you as individuals through this group, that we would value the individuals higher than the systems or than the building or than anything that we actually do here, that we would be all about expressing grace to those around us and allowing them to grow closer to you as we do too. I pray this in Jesus' name. Have a great week.